everybody, and welcome to the RISE Summit. This is Nunaisi, and I am so honored to have with us today a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Arielle Schwartz. She is a PhD, a clinical psychologist, EMDR consultant, somatic psychotherapist, yoga instructor, and internationally sought out teacher. As an author of 6 books and leading voice in trauma treatment, she believes that the journey of trauma recovery is an awakening of the spiritual heart. Is that aligned with our summit or what? This is exactly what we're here to transmit to you, dear ones. So I'm gonna dive right in. Hello, Arielle. It's such an honor to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
I really appreciate your work around trauma. It seems that you are a well of knowledge. And I just want to start a little bit by you telling a little bit about your backstory. How did you ended up doing the work that you do?
Well, it's a long story, and I'll give a short version of it. And I know we all have our stories, but the short version is that I really came by this very honestly, in the sense that I grew up in a lot of dysregulation for myself and across 2 households that created a very deep, what I'll call kind of fracture of my own sense of self, and or fragmentation of my own sense of self in ways that I was dissociating, but I didn't have this language for it. I didn't have language of what is complex trauma. I didn't have language of what is dissociation. What I did know is that I felt very disconnected. I had a lot of somatization of experience where my body really shut down in relationship to the types of stressors that I faced. And I experienced a lot of anxiety, and I experienced a tremendous amount of shame. And as I continued to emerge and grow, there would be these kind of touchstones or these islands of kind of coming back home to myself, or feeling integrated, or feeling more whole. And those islands were found in those sacred relationships where I felt understood and accepted. Those islands were found on my yoga mat, going into a yoga class, and I would come out from a yoga class going, I feel better. I feel more connected to myself. In kind of other embodiment type practices. And so all of that got me very curious to understand more about kind of what would bring me back home. And initially, I would say that my journey into this field was for my own repair, for my own integration. And I think that's so often the case. And it brought me into the study of somatic psychology, or body-centered psychotherapy. It also brought me into the study to become a yoga teacher. So both of those I did at the age of 23, or I began at the age of 23. And also with therapy and becoming a therapist and doing my own therapy, and kind of that whole journey moving forward. I'd say one more kind of added piece is that there were also some very specific events that happened in my early 20s. I had several car accidents. I had, gone through my own relationship wounds and losses, and gratefully had been guided to go experience EMDR therapy for myself, to go seek that for myself. And that was a turning point as well. The embodiment practices, and then adding what I would call now that kind of brain-body integration from the EMDR, where there was this absolute kind of tipping point that occurred, where the generative force of feeling like I was gathering resources and feeling increasingly capable of giving back started to happen.
Thank you for that. I really liked how you explained those islands of connection. And I think that all of us have those moments where we kind of beyond the little wounded me, and we feel that wholeness connection to the divine. And that's what really pulls us and calls us home, right? Because we know it's there. I would like you to maybe talk a little bit about EMDR for people that not quite know what it is.
Great. So it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And after I experienced it for myself, I went and trained in it in 2001. So I've been trained in this for a long time. And kind of the short definition of what is EMDR therapy is that it's an integrative phase-based model of trauma treatment that starts with understanding yourself in the context of your history, understanding your client in the context of how do we bring in the resources that we need to feel grounded, to feel safe, to feel relationally connected in the here and now, so that we can use those resources, that kind of island of connection, as we turn toward this a specific traumatic event or the discomfort of an accumulation of traumatic events as that shows up in our own body. So we practice what we call dual attention or dual awareness state, where we can keep one foot really grounded in a sense of here now orientation and safety as we dip our toe into the trauma state. And very often we have this metaphor, if we, put 2 feet into the trauma state, we're much more likely to feel overwhelmed or re-traumatized by the exposure to that traumatic material or flooded in some way. So we pendulate in a very wise way of turning towards that traumatic material, the image of it, the thoughts associated with it, the beliefs you carry about yourself, the emotions. We turn toward that for short bouts of time, and then we pause and reflect on what are we noticing now. And it's a mindfulness-based practice, it's a body-based practice, and then it utilizes something that anchors that dual awareness, which is called bilateral stimulation. And so the eye movements facilitate that bilateral stimulation by basically taking your eyes left to right. But we also know that you can facilitate that bilateral stimulation through bilateral tapping, through bilateral sounds. So there's different ways that we kind of anchor what we call working attention on the present moment as we're turning a portion of our attention to the trauma-related experience.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. And what comes to me is it feels like integration of the feminine and masculine energies together, right? Because it's the right and left sides of the brain.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it. And I do think there's a quality of both that that capacity to be kind of directive in our thinking and linear, and the great wisdom that comes with trusting the fluidity and the associative process. And EMDR really works with kind of letting go of control to some degree of where our mind goes. We actually really want to trust that it's kind of like awake dreaming. Where you're just letting your mind go to wherever it goes. And sometimes it takes us to quite beautiful and surprising places.
And so I want to ask you this question. I know that you have written about post-traumatic growth. However, how can we support our resilience in the midst of ongoing stressful or traumatic events, such as the pandemic?
Right. Here we are 2 years in, at least at the time of our recording right now, into the degree of chronic stress that I think so many of us, the majority of people, at least I speak to, have experienced during this time. The isolation, the experiences of being separated distance-wise from loved ones, not being able to visit family, the experience of worrying about our own health or the health of loved ones, and all of the unknowns, right? We keep having to adapt and then adapt again. And then there's another change and we have to adapt again. We think we're opening up. Wait, it's not safe to open up. And so we're just responding to so much rapid change. So I speak a lot, I write a lot about post-traumatic growth, right? I have my book on that, but I've been trying to apply those same principles to what I'm referring to now as peri-traumatic growth, right? How do we stay resilient in the midst of this ongoing trauma? And it's relevant, of course, to our pandemic, but it's also relevant if you are parenting kids and it's stressful, if you're going through a difficult phase in your relationship, if you are, going through a move or a job transition. So any of those things might not necessarily be traumatic, but it certainly, can be stressful phases where how do we really best optimize our resilience? And I look at resilience from a few frameworks. One is that it's a psychological process, that it's how we think about what we're going through. It's the narrative that we generate for ourselves. It's the ability to maintain a quality of hope or a sense of possibility in the midst of hardship. But resilience is also physiological, right? And if we are just using what in therapy we sometimes refer to as top-down strategies, the mind is going to take us so far. What we really want to do is actually access and attend to and listen to the body and kind of work with where those stucknesses get held in the body and use tools of breath and movement and time in nature and fresh air and touch or self-touch to reconnect to that felt sense of okayness in the midst of challenge, right? Like we can take those, we can take these breaks from having to, face and adapt and manage and just attend. For me, yoga is a big part of that. Also, time in nature. Those are my biggies. I love dance, right? There's so many different ways that we can access it. Maybe it's Tai Chi or Qigong or receiving touch in the form of massage, but having ways to really get embodied.
Yeah, I can't agree more with you. I also, from my own experience of healing severe trauma, I found that I call it the 4 pillars of healing and transformation, which is sound, movement, breath, and touch. And I think that's kind of, and being in nature, I mean, that's a given. Yeah, so that's how we really go beyond the wiring and what is still resides in our body, right?
Yes. And I love your 4 pillars. They're so resonant with how I think and work. And I love that you have sound in there. For me, my background is also as a singer. I've sung in choirs my entire life since I was like 6 years old, and but I think that some of my most transformational and what I would say spiritual moments have been through sound and music.
Yeah. So I want to ask you this question. Can you share what we call the 6 R's of neuropsychotherapy and how does this help us heal from trauma?
Yes. So the first of these, first of all, what is neuropsychotherapy? Let me just back up for a second. Neuropsychotherapy is what I would say is the emerging convergence of neuroscience and psychotherapy, and this understanding that we can apply the knowledge base that we have now about neuroplasticity, and that it used to be thought that the brains were, relatively plastic during early childhood development, and then relatively fixed after that point. And now research tells us that we have neuroplasticity throughout the lifespan, which is beautiful and allows us to continue to grow and change and develop and heal and all of that great stuff. So the 6 R's of neuropsychotherapy are kind of my consolidation of that research based on the neuroscience of how we change. And the first of these is the art of relating or relationships, that our brains are wired for connection and are changed by connection, by relationships. And so when we have those experiences of what we call co-regulating others or well-attuned connections with other people who are really able to kind of offer their social engagement, their warmth, their sense of safety, that we can really allow ourselves to heal inside of that connection. The second of the R's is resourcing. That in resourcing, we are accessing positive states and that we're pausing to actually register those positive states. There's all this research out there about how our brains are wired with a negativity bias, right? Like it's our survival mechanism. And it's because at some point we're out there, fighting saber-toothed tigers and, right? Like, out there hunting and needing to know like which woods had the wolf or whatever it was, right? And so we're wired to scan our environment for what might be a source of threat. And we're registering that without conscious awareness all the time. But what we can do as a lovely strengthening practice is actually to scan for the good. I'll borrow from Rick Hansen here in his neuroscience of wiring positivity or wiring happiness, that we can scan for what's good. We can really pause and savor moments where we feel safe or connected or deeply nourished, or feelings of awe or beauty or gratitude, right? And we can actually build those positive states. We register a threat in a fraction of a second, but it takes about 30 seconds of conscious reflection to actually let your body register a positive state. So it's kind of like going to the brain gym, right? Like we're building that muscle to sustain positive state. Mm-hmm. That then takes us into what I refer to as the R of repattern. And repatterning is recognizing where the body might carry states of unfinished traumatic activation or stress, and we might hold that in our gut or in our chest or in our throat or in our jaw or as headaches, right? We have all of these places where we tend to hold that activation. And so repatterning is really reflecting on what are those experiences of tension in the body linked to from the past? And what is incomplete? What didn't get to happen in that event? So Peter Levine in the somatic experiencing arena calls these thwarted instincts. I didn't get to run. I didn't get to fight back. I didn't get to use my voice. I didn't get to reach for connection. So repatterning actually allows us to find all of those movement sequences in the body and slow it down and really feel the completion of where this stuck experience in the body, what's really it's needing from us, what is wanting to happen next. How does the body actually guide us to that completion? And when we stop and listen, it's there, it's right there. The next R is reprocessing. And so going back to EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, we can then reprocess the memory networks. So if the traumatic memory is held also as a kind of a neural network in the brain and body, and it's disconnected from our positive states, we can now, once we have enough resource and enough flexibility in our physiology, we can go toward the traumatic memory, and we can reprocess it in a way that allows it to link up or hook up with our current experience of resource. And that can be embodied resource, that could be a visualized resource, that could be a here and now sense of connection, and so forth. Going into our last two R's, the fourth one is reflection, which is meaning making. It's pausing to reflect on that kind of big picture of our life. It's thinking about the events that we have endured, the strengths that we have gathered about ourselves. It's weaving that all together into a coherent sense of self. And I talk a whole lot about that in the Post-Traumatic Growth Guidebook. And then the sixth R is resilience, which is both the process that actually goes through all of the 6 R's, and it's also the outcome of that felt sense of more freedom and more flexibility and greater ability to adapt to stress.
Wow, you just shared so much. I hope you guys gonna listen to it more than once, because it's so packed with so much incredible wisdom of the process of really moving away from trauma, which is possible for all of us. And it's really something that you have to decide, you have to actively want to happen, but the resources and the amazing therapists like Arielle are there. So it's just really to reach out and and ask for that guidance, for that support, for that help, right?
You use such a key word in there, which is the word of choice, right? You have to want this.
Mm-hmm.
And even the research on any kind of exposure-based therapy, even EMDR, if it's forced upon you, if you're going into healing work because someone else wants you to do it, or because your therapist says this is the way to do it, and it doesn't feel right, it's not going to work. It's not going to feel good. It could feel awful or re-traumatizing. But if you're choosing to go towards something, even though it's difficult or it's painful or it's a painful emotion, but still you're choosing to turn toward it, that's a very different story, right? Then we know that we can opt in, we can opt out, we can take breaks as needed, but there's something empowering about that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think every therapist had an experience of somebody that came to see him because his wife or his husband or her husband or somebody sent them there, and it's just never going to work. It's never going to work. One has to want it and be committed to the process, because that's when shift can happen, right? Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And so I want to ask you, what do you feel are the biggest barriers to traumatic growth, and how can we navigate these challenges successfully?
Yeah, well, you named one just there. That's a real significant one, which is when it's kind of being forced down your throat. We don't want that, right? And I would say another significant barrier is really our own fear of the discomfort, and that, we have very often kind of cultivated a whole range of defenses around not feeling vulnerable, because feeling vulnerable can feel out of control. Or if I let go of that part of me that just goes, does, I'm just going to fall apart, and then I'll be lazy and I'll never get anything done. Or, so we have all of these kind of stories or narratives that we've developed around why maybe it's not okay to feel sad, or to feel afraid, right? To feel our hurt, to feel our experiences of rejection. And then we, create all of these strategies in our lives to avoid that, right? To avoid that, maybe because of an addiction that helps us avoid it, or we avoid it because we start, emotionally eating, and we use food to avoid the feeling, or we avoid the terror that comes along with the fear of rejection by clinging and hanging on in a way that actually backfires, right? So we have all of these behaviors that we might do to just simply, it's not simple, but to avoid feeling that difficult, painful feeling that's underneath it. And so we navigate those barriers with phenomenal compassion, right? Like, those barriers came in for a reason, whether it's an addiction or a relationship addiction, or a relationship to food, or a relationship to exercise, or workaholism, or perfectionism. You can put all of these, layers in there. And so what we want to do is turn towards, like, oh, of course, you or I or whoever, whether it's yourself or your client, of course I developed that strategy because no one ever helped me be with that difficult feeling. No one ever showed up and offered that compassion. And so when that feeling comes up in me, I assume that that's to be rejected again, to, that will make someone leave again if I show that part of myself, right? So we can, again, turn back towards those tools of finding a good, attuned, co-regulating other, that caring other, if you want to think about it as that positive, unconditional positive regard that Carl Rogers speaks about. So we need the others to help us navigate those barriers in ourselves. And then ultimately, we often use this phrase that co-regulation precedes self-regulation. And that once we have experienced that deep quality of acceptance from another, we internalize that. Once we've experienced allowing another to see our hurt or our sadness or our fear, and they didn't run away and they didn't reject us, then we internalize that and we start to build greater capacity to turn towards those vulnerable feelings in ourselves. And I often, really start to see that reframe that vulnerability is strength, right? That we can actually recognize that willingness to be vulnerable is an invitation for others to drop in and be more real, be more authentic. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes, again, quite generative in nature.
I love what you just said. There's so much in there again. I think that what happens is that when we get hurt, first of all, we get hurt in relationship and we heal in relationship as well, right? And what happens that when we're growing up, and for so many of us, we have not been unconditionally accepted or loved or feeling belong, and we had to move away from our authentic center and really as a coping mechanism adopt all these false identifications. And so I think there's that risk in also letting go of all that codes or layers that define who am I, and all of a sudden there's a question, well, actually, who am I, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I loved what you named there around the ways that we get pulled out of ourselves. Because I think very often, especially when I focus, for those of us that really focus on attachment trauma and very early young wounding, mm-hmm. a lot of that young wounding leads us to either get pulled out of just that sense of being. It's safe to be in my body. It's safe for me just to be me. And that I get pulled out into vigilance of having to track my environment or track my other, right? Whether it's the mother or caregiver, whoever that person is, right? I have to track you in order to navigate this world. And so I get pulled out of self. Or conversely, sometimes we get stuck in, there's nobody there. There's no one to rely on. And so I get stuck in self without that capacity to come out towards relational reach. And I think that, what we see when we look at kind of the resilient body mind is that capacity to go inward with our attention and to come outward with our attention with relative fluidity.
And so I would like to invite you to share an embodiment practice with our audience. I know that you're very big on embodiment and you love to share something with us. So go for it.
Thank you. It'd be a tremendous joy to guide you through an embodiment practice. And what I'll invite you to start with is actually where we just ended with our conversation. So to start with, just becoming aware of the quality of your own attention. And I'll imagine right now that it's been rather outwardly focused, perhaps watching the screen and or listening to our voices. But to take a moment invite your attention to begin to notice your internal domain. And it's completely up to you if you want your eyes open or closed for this. And as you draw your awareness inside, I'll invite you just to notice the quality of your mind, your thoughts. Whether your mind feels kind of sparked, inspired. Maybe you feel fatigued, could be what time of day it is for you, how much you've done during your day, or how you slept last night if it's early in the morning. And whenever we come into a mindful embodiment practice, it's really resides in a place of non-judgment and curiosity, so that there's room for you to be spacious with in your mind and body, that everything is welcome here. So as we continue our journey inward, beginning to notice your emotions, what's present for you in that domain. Maybe tapping into recollections of your own vulnerable emotions, given that we've been speaking about that here. And perhaps related to your day or your week or this time in the world, on the planet. It's creating space for what is present for you emotionally. Noticing your breath, where your breath is moving freely, maybe where you find that your breath gets a little stuck. Perhaps even inviting that deeper breath or a sigh. Yeah, that feel good, right? Just creating some space for you. The breath really is a magnificent tool for that quality of creating space. More room for your mind, for your emotions, and we'll use the breath to tap into body. So just noticing your physical body, areas of tension, areas of ease. Now I'm guiding this seated, however, you're welcome to stand or lay on the floor, right? Whatever's going to support you to connect to your body. Getting to know what's present for you here and now, how your body might be a reflection of that quality of mind or your emotional tone or your breath. And with that awareness of body, also tapping into an awareness of your energy, whether you feel alert, light, spacious, expanded, or perhaps there's a quality of feeling more contracted, heavy, weighed down, and without judgment, right? Like those rhythms of contraction and expansion are very integral to who we all are, right? We see that rhythm of contraction and expansion all around us. It's the spanda, it's in the universe that's expanding and contracting, in the flowers that open to the sun and close in the evenings, in the waves on the ocean. So I'll invite you just to explore a little bit of movement, following your own breath, which in itself is a rhythm of expansion and contraction. So it might be something as simple as allowing your heart to lift, your gaze to lift slightly on the inhale, and exhale, drawing yourself right into midline, right into center, curling your head forward, and finding your rhythm, your pattern, your range. We added in that little sigh before, and I'll invite that again, a sigh or a sound, just to find your own tone. And using that sound as its own kind of transformational guidance, so that if there are those places in your body that were tight or tense and maybe where the breath wasn't quite reaching, use the sound, use a stretch, use a contraction to go toward that place. What's the sound of that place? right? You can contract around it. And then maybe the sound of a release. Right? And this is very organic. So it doesn't have to look like what you're seeing in me or what you're seeing on your screen or what anybody else does, right? This is very much following and listening. And inside of those contractions, we can become curious about the emotional nature or even the historical nature of how your body has been shaped. And allowing yourself to be curious and to follow. To follow the thread of your own sensation, your own awareness, your own associations. And I'll invite you to find a pause, just knowing that perhaps you've been moving, breathing for a few minutes here. And in the pause, sense what's changed. It might be a little bit more of a stirring or more awareness or even an amplified experience of that tension or that tightness. And if that's there, that's okay, right? That's actually part of this waking up. So perhaps placing your hand or hands right over any part of your body that is talking to you, that's has maybe more warmth, more heat, more tingliness, maybe even a little more tightness. And it is if you were bringing your hands to gather up a small child with the most loving intention. Can you simply just hold that experience of yourself in the most sweet and compassionate manner, not trying to make anything go away, not trying to get rid of anything, rather attending to and kind of sweetly holding what is. And that gentle breath, stir, wait, maybe holding an inquiry about what this sensation or emotion or part of you might need from you. And as we begin to bring our little practice here to a close, I'll invite you just to check in and see if there's anything incomplete from this journey. Perhaps if you identify that need, you might need to make an agreement with yourself of how you'll return to this experience, to this part of yourself, how you'll continue to attend to yourself in this loving way. And then slowly, whenever you feel ready, so reorienting your attention into that external domain, drawing yourself back out from that deeper dive or coming up to the surface of your awareness and tuning into your five senses of what you hear, what you sense on the surface of your skin. And you might even just rub your fingertips along your upper arms from shoulders down to elbows for a moment, or across the surface of your face. tuning into your palms. You can even rub them together, wiggle your fingertips. And as you open your eyes, just being aware of what you see. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was super powerful.
Good. Yeah. I really enjoyed that little pause of connection with you, and just really feeling like amazing to me that I can be in Colorado in the US and you can be in South Africa. And here we are, around the world from each other, and that this connection is right here. That's beautiful. And I really, invite everyone watching just to feel that, right? Like you're part of this. It's an amazing thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I can feel your heart and your sincerity and your commitment and your dedication, and really you're doing such a profound work. So I really want to take a moment and really say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Received. Thank you.
And I know that you also have an amazing gift for those that get the VIP ticket. So this is definitely a reason for you guys to go and purchase that ticket and have this recording for life and go over it again and again. And can you please share with us what you're gifting us with?
Yes. So I have a channel of guided practices, guided embodiment practices. It's on YouTube. It's on my website. It is really the guided practice of that has kind of been my pandemic project across this time. And I've also kind of gathered together a resource of applied polyvagal theory in yoga into an ebook, which will be available to your listeners. So you'll have a link to that as well.
Thank you so much. And if people want to connect with you, work with you, find you, what's the best places?
So you can absolutely find me on YouTube at Dr. Arielle Schwartz, on Facebook at Dr. Arielle Schwartz, on my website, which is Dr. Arielle Schwartz. It all makes it pretty easy because they're all in the same, they're all the same name. They're all under that. So just drarielleschwartz.com is the website, and really hope to be able to connect with you all further.
Great. We're going to have all the links down below. So please, if you feel called, if you feel aligned, if you feel connected, make the contact and carry on this beautiful work. Thank you so much, Dr. Arielle, for being here and sharing your wisdom and your passion.
Thank you. Thank you. A true pleasure to be with you.
Ciao now. Bye, everyone.